In his Gospel, St. John does not speak of the miracles that Jesus worked. Rather, he speaks of the signs that Jesus performed. The first 12 chapters of St. John's Gospel are called the Book of Signs. In these chapters, John shows Jesus performing 7 signs. By speaking of signs, Jesus is inviting his readers or listeners to look more deeply into the actions of Jesus, to look beyond the miracles that Jesus performed, and to see the deeper significance of his actions. The same is true of some of the words or terms that St. John uses in his Gospel spoken by Jesus. Again, look beyond these terms to the deeper meaning that they are signifying. The account of the marriage feast at Cana begins with the words not heard in today's reading, "On the third day there was a wedding at Cana." By saying this, John did not mean 3 24-hour periods. Rather, those reading or hearing this account would immediately know that John was talking, when he said 3 days, that it was referred to the resurrection of Jesus. Jesus rose from the dead on the third day, and that would have been the meaning that those hearing or reading the gospel would take from those words. In speaking of the 6 stone water jars, John was also making a statement. These 6 jars were used for ceremonial Jewish washings. By changing the water in these jars into an abundance of fine, choice wine, John was saying that the old Jewish rituals were being done away with. By changing the water into abundance of fine wine, Jesus was also fulfilling a prophecy that stated that when the Messiah came, it would be a time when the people would enjoy rich, juicy food and abundance of fine, choice wine. For this sign, it was an indication that the Messiah had come in the person of Jesus and that something new was happening. The old order was passing away. There was a new creation occurring now that Jesus, the Messiah, had come into the world. What was John's purpose in speaking about 7 signs that Jesus would perform in the first 12 chapters of his gospel? In the Jewish mentality of that time, the number 7 referred to perfection. Through these 7 signs, then, John was saying that they perfectly revealed who Jesus was, the long-awaited Messiah. And as John said in the prologue of his gospel, in the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. John was saying then, Jesus was the Messiah. Jesus was the Word of God made flesh. We can now ask, what was Mary's role at the marriage feast at Cana? First of all, in John's gospel, he never calls his mother by name. Rather, as we heard in this morning's reading, he says, "Woman, how does this of yours concern me?" He also used that same term as Mary stood at the foot of the cross. Why? Eve was the first woman. Her name meant woman. And along with her husband, Adam, the first man, the relationship that God wanted to have with his human creatures was destroyed. In John's mind, Mary is the new Eve, the new woman, who by giving birth to Jesus, who was the new Adam, she was instrumental in restoring the human relationship between human beings and God. In responding to Mary's statement, "They have no wine," Jesus responded, "Woman, how does your concern affect me? My hour has not yet come." Again, in John's Gospel, the hour had a special meaning. It was the meaning that Jesus used when he spoke of his passion, death, and resurrection. that hour was to come when Jesus went through his passion, death, and resurrection. And so, in a sense, we can say that Mary forced Jesus' hand, causing him to do something before his hour had arrived. Notice that Mary did not tell the stewards what to do. She ignored what Jesus said and simply told the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Perhaps we can imagine Jesus standing there thinking, "Okay, Mother, you get what you want, not what I want." John ends this account by saying Jesus did this as the beginning of his signs in Cana of Galilee, and so revealed his glory, and his disciples began to believe in him. This is the purpose of the signs that Jesus performed, to reveal his glory, so that those who witnessed these signs would believe in him as the Messiah and as the Word of God. The other actions that Jesus would perform, the other signs that Jesus would perform, was Jesus speaking with the Samaritan woman at the well in chapter 4, the curing of the man who had been sick for 38 years in chapter 5, the multiplication of those during the Passion time, chapter 6, Jesus walking on the sea in chapter 6 also, the curing of the man born blind in chapter 9, and Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead. Each of these signs revealed the glory of Jesus, revealing who he was. But back to Mary. Again, Mary did not tell Jesus what to do. She left it up to him to do whatever he thought best. And this must be the mentality we have as we approach Mary to intercede for us. Certainly we are invited to place our needs, our petitions in Mary's hands, trusting that she will take them to Jesus. But as she does so, let us listen to what Mary says to us. Do whatever he tells you. Accept the will of my Son. He may not respond to your prayers and petitions as you may wish or want, but he will respond to them in the way that he knows best, as he wills. Have the faith to believe that my Son, in his great love for you, will do what is for your good and the good for those of whom you are praying. Certainly we can always trust in Mary's intercessory power for us. We can go to Mary placing our needs in her hands, trusting that she will place them in the hands of Jesus. But as she does so, we must also remember what she said to the servants: do whatever Jesus tells you. Do whatever the Lord wants to do. Place your trust in the Lord and believe that your prayers have been answered.